My name is Deborah Rosinski. I'm Executive Director of Bainbridge Arts and Crafts, and it's my pleasure to be here today with Niraja. Lorenz is here with us out of Eugene, Oregon. She is part of our wonderful third annual Fresh Talent Exhibition that opens in October, juried by Richard Notkin. And Niraja is going to be sharing some about her work and process, and I'm excited to hear more. It's really wonderful, detailed, intricate work, that some of which I see behind you. And I'm going to stay out of your way and let you do the bulk of the talking.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having my piece in your show, as well as inviting me for this interview. I'm excited to be part of this, so thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about the piece that is going to be at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts and share with you some of the process that I go through in creating pieces. So this is the finished piece, which is called Uprising. And I'm just going to go right into how I start out. In creating something like this, I'll start by making the individual units. And this is just pinned up on the wall. The strips are sewn together. I do a lot of what's called strip piecing, which is sewing together fabrics in stripes to make new fabrics. So take, for instance, the purple and yellow thicker stripe. That's already sewn together, but it's pinned up into that shape. And I'll make a whole bunch of these. So here's an example of many of them that did get into the final piece. Once I have something that I like, I'll sew the wedges together. So they're made in hexagons, these are. So there'll be 6 wedges sewn together. And then I start arranging, playing. Here I'm looking at possible backgrounds. And it's all very much a work in progress. Another possible set of backgrounds, and I'm actually beginning, you can see in the center on the yellow and the pale orange, I'm beginning to put some pieces in there that will fill those colors. Now here it's getting much more filled in. And in addition, I've created some lines out of boxes that run through the piece, but they are very subtle. A little bit further along, repositioning things as I go. And here I took those subtle lines and made them more pronounced. I liked the lines that connected the pieces, but they just weren't strong enough. So I put in some stronger lines. And here is the piece all sewn together. And finally is quilted, so with the quilting lines as well. So that's a really quick, what probably took me 2 or 3 months to create. Wow. It's a real quick version.
That seems fast for quilting. 2 or 3 months, actually.
Yeah.
So is there a whole tradition of strip piecing in quilt making?
There is. I love strip piecing. To give a little bit of my background in quilting, I've been quilting for about 30 years. A friend took me to a fabric store about 30 years ago, and I was like, oh my, these are beautiful. I want to do this. And so I went out and bought an inexpensive machine and some scraps of fabric, which you could buy like for $1 a bucket or something, and just started sewing them together. And I did that for years. And then it was in 2007, I was fortunate enough to take a workshop with Nancy Crow, who has been my mentor and teacher since that time. And one of the first classes she teaches is strip piecing. A couple examples of strip piecing. So this, these lines are about 1/4 inch wide, and I'll cut selvage to selvage and sew them together. So I end up with a new piece of fabric that's 40 inches wide and as many strips as I want to add. Here's another example. I got really excited about making these tiny little strips, and I've been using that a lot in the last few years. But one of the first classes Nancy teaches is strip piecing. It doesn't look anything like this, but it's creating new fabrics, selvage to selvage, and then cutting sections off of them. And it's a very meditative practice for me just to make those fabrics. And then I've been exploring different ways of using them for the last 15 years. So.
Well, the piece has a very unique kind of look to it compared to a lot of quilts I've seen. And it's interesting. I read about your background as a research psychologist and biologist.
Yes.
And you were a child of an artist and a scientist. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And speak to those influences on your interests.
Well, they've both influenced me a great deal. My mother was an artist, and she always had art-related projects for me to explore. And I tended to be drawn to fibers, and I wove, and I did macrame and crocheting and knitting, but three-dimensional things, not really the traditional. And other things, I also enjoyed playing with colors. I did stained glass and a lot of beadwork. And so since I was in grade school, I've been involved in that. I started weaving seriously right after high school, and that was my passion for many years until I discovered quilting. My father was a scientist involved with chaos theory, and a lot of my work, I feel I've really drawn that chaos is sort of things are not random, but they're not ordered either. And that a commonly known expression is the butterfly effect. There's the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas. And I see that in my work, because if I change something just a little bit one way or the other, or flip it around, you get a totally new image. So that randomness I allow into my work. I welcome it in.
Well, and you've got such a rich control of color in these pieces as well. Are you dyeing any of the fabrics, or is it all found?
I do dye fabric. I buy solids, commercial fabrics. I buy hand dyes from other people. And I have a lot of friends who send me their scraps, which I love using because it gives me not just, 5 reds, but then I can have 50 reds to choose from. And in a piece like the one behind me, there's a little, 100 different shades. So I love that subtle variation that I can use with hand-dyed fabrics.
Yeah, it's almost like an impressionist painting, the way, small bits of color make up identifiable shapes. And
yeah.
So you retired from working in the sciences, and
I did. I was a research psychologist, social science research. And around the time the pandemic began, I was cutting back my hours. And then I just said, okay, we're done. A lot of the work I did was working one-on-one with participants. And that came to an end at that point. And so it was a real easy time for me to step out of that job. And now I'm full-time in my studio, which is in my house. So it makes, I can get up in the morning and go downstairs, and I'll work for a couple hours even before my first cup of coffee.
I look at all the shapes in your pieces, and it really draws me in, kind of almost like each hexagram is a different world that you could explore.
I love that. I've used the name Strange Attractor for a whole series of work I've done. Mm-hmm. And a strange attractor is something that draws you in. And it's a strange attractor is one that has a fractal structure, so a repeating pattern at many dimensions. And while I don't think the piece in behind me exemplifies that, a lot of my work has really sort of worked with those concepts out of chaos theory.
Can you describe a little bit more about that theory?
I can try. Well, it's a theory that started in the sciences looking at weather systems and that how hard it is to predict the weather. We all know that. And so the concept of the butterfly effect that, you know, if it's 1 degree warmer or the wind's 2 degrees stronger, may make totally different weather patterns in the future. And so incorporating that into my work, I could say, well, if I put these things really close together or I move them far apart, we're going to have a totally different impact. And so that theory of things aren't random, but they're not ordered either. There's some limits to what they can do, is sort of, it's not like that influenced me to do the work, but as I was seeing the work, it felt like that's what was happening.
Sometimes we figure out what it's about after the fact, it seems.
Right, yeah. Because I generally don't start with an idea or something that I want to create. I may have a palette that I feel like using right now, and I'll start by pulling colors, but my piece never ends up with those colors. You know, it's always going to change, but that's a place for me to start, and often influenced by my environment, the seasons, travels, places I've been, will influence the palette I use, and maybe the size of the shapes and the denseness of them. So that's sort of allowing the piece to unfold. And as it progresses, for me, a story always emerges. It's like, oh, I'm doing this. So the piece that you have at Bainbridge, Uprising, it was made during a time of the pandemic, and there were huge fires here. The air was so thick I couldn't see across the street. It was just a dark time. And I really felt like I needed the uplifting, cheerful energy. And so as I was putting that together, I began to see it as forms rising and, you know, cleansing and maybe renewing. It has a sort of a spring palette to it. And it was, for me, just a joyful feeling that came from it.
Are there any quilt makers or painters or other artistic disciplines with people that you particularly follow or are influenced by?
I'm sure there are, but I don't have a background in art or art history, or, you know, there's things I see that I love. And I've certainly been influenced by Nancy Crow. But there's other quilt artists whose work I love and I'm very aware of. But I don't think, I mean, maybe Impressionist and some of the abstract expressionist art has inspired me in ways that I'm not really even aware of. You know, but it's not a focus of my practice.
It seems very process oriented, very in the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very, I expected a lot of it is, you know, the emotions that I'm feeling at the time are coming out through it. And I do have pieces that are more pictorial, that, you know, you can definitely say that's a mountain and there's a rainbow or whatever. And people tend to like those a lot. But personally, I love, like, the one behind me that is, you know, totally unpredictable and, you know, full of it. As you said earlier, draws you in, and the closer you get, the more detail you're going to see. So from across the room, it may look amazing, but as you get close, it's like, wow, that's piece of red is actually made out of 27 pieces of fabric, something like that.
Right. And then there's your whole layer of machine stitching over everything.
Correct. Right. And different pieces will incorporate different amounts of stitching. Sometimes the stitching, I really want it to be invisible. The piece behind me, you don't see a lot of stitching. Other pieces, I actually will use contrasting colors and shapes on top of it to create another layer of interest.
Do you think any of your past as a weaver filters in? Or whether conscious or unconscious?
Well, as a weaver, I was again combining lots of colors. I like to use novelty yarns that might have been made out of multiple colors, and it had a lot of some of that same interest in the detail that's here. I do have pieces that look like weavings, but I haven't focused on that really. I mean, I'm sure it's come through.
So it's been great to talk to you and learn more about your work and process. And thank you for sharing your thoughts and all that you have learned along the way as a quilter and artist.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm honored to be part of the show, and I look forward to seeing it.
Stop in soon to see Fresh Talent 3, a wonderfully diverse group of art on view at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts until October 29th.